كن سعيدا كن فريدا عش بفخر في الحياة لا تبالي فالمعالي بالتحدي لا سواه.
Assalamu alaikum, we're back with episode 3. This is Wania and Dina. Today we're going to be talking about mental health and its importance in Islam. So I feel like this is a really important topic to discuss. As you know, midterm season has just finished and finals are right around the corner. Yeah. So a lot of university students are, mental health. It's a big topic, right? Iffy topic, especially in Muslim communities as well. I feel like mental health is viewed as kind of like a taboo topic, like you don't want to get into it.
Yeah, and I feel like it's really disregarded as like just go pray. Like if a lot of people, older generation would assume that if you are, struggling with your mental health, that means that you're not praying enough, you're not, being your faith has something to do with your faith.
Yeah.
So we decided to do some research on this and, give you all the facts that you need. So in your next conversation with people who might disregard, mental health and say like, oh, just pray more or whatever, we actually discuss here the importance of how Islam takes care of our mental health, how there are institutions in the Islamic age, and how we took care of mental health, as a Muslim community previously. So I just want to ask, if I, let's say, ask you where do you think the first psychiatric hospital was built in the world?
Honestly, because of that idea that, what's it called? Mental health is it's something where you just come to Western civilization and mental health is a
thing now.
It wasn't a thing back home, but it's a thing here.
Yeah.
So I would think that the first mental health hospital would have built by Europe or something.
Yeah, and that's the answer for a lot of people. But actually the first psychiatric hospital was founded in Baghdad in the 8th century under the Abbasi Khalifa Harun Rashid, which is something to really think about. We always say that, again, mental health is a Western structure, or it's something that was actually we're not familiar with it, but actually the first psychiatric hospital was made by Muslims. And when you imagine especially psychiatric institutions of the past, I would say you'd imagine people chained up in rooms, very dark, probably electrocuting them and stuff like that. But it would be more research I made about these psychiatric hospitals that are made in the Islamic age, we get to know how Muslims have a humanistic approach to medicine, basically. And these houses and hospitals were called Dar al-Shifa, which basically translates to the house of
healing.
House of healing, yes, place of healing. Unlike the negative connotation that we have to psychiatric hospitals right now. And crazy enough, they weren't actually secluded. They were in the middle of town, which means that it wasn't a taboo topic. It wasn't oh, this is a mentally ill person, let's shove them away.
Yeah.
They were actually in the middle of town. And due to the Islamic emphasis actually of visiting the ill, there was a lot of community around these people. And this is this is a very important point, I think, how Islam, thousands of years ago, now research tells us how, social impact can help people with mental health and their mental illnesses, but Islam
was handling this
thousands of years ago, because it's our duty, it's our, Islamic social responsibility to actually visit the ill, and that helps. Just again, as I said, recent studies has shown the impact of social support on mental health and all other disease, other illnesses. So I think that's very important to talk about. Actually, as I've mentioned before, if we want to visualize these places, they actually had beautiful gardens and fountains to keep patients calm when they had any sort of problems or anxieties. And also upon discharge of these places, they were giving monetary help to help them come back into society. They weren't seen as a burden. Actually, they were seen as people that people we need to help, and we need to be there for them as a community, rather than shun them away and act like it's such a taboo topic we shouldn't talk about it.
Yeah, and I feel if you look at hospitals now compared to hospitals in the past, run by more Western civilizations, it's the hospitals now are more similar to how Islamic hospitals hospitals in Muslim communities were in the past than they were to how Western hospitals were in the past.
Exactly. So we were pioneers actually in the best way possible. So it's really interesting how people are oh, this is not a concept that we engage in. And actually treatments, these psychiatrists that were in Islamic hospitals or Muslim hospitals, they had access to a lot of treatments, including antidepressants. I think this is like a shocker to hear for a lot of our Muslim community, because they believe antidepressants is, again, like just people trying to drug you or something.
Yeah.
You know, but there were actually antidepressants which were used. They were actually referred to as mufarrih an-nafs, which is the gladdener of spirit. But they also, it's important to mention that they prefer to use these, these antidepressants along with other holistic treatments methods to minimize side effects. And a lot of people who do go on antidepressants would tell you that there are a lot of side effects that are not.
Definitely.
Yeah, so it's not like one treatment and it's solved. They actually took a holistic approach to everything. So they would use actually auditory therapy, such as the Quran and other naturally occurring voices, such as, water falling or, birds chirping and stuff like that. And actually, like, this is like a tip for everyone. If you're feeling really anxious, like if there's a river nearby or like just the sound of water running really, really like helps you out. And they knew that a long time ago already. And they also gave their patients baths, and they took good care of them. They made sure they had healthy diet, and as well they treated them. They had other treatments like pumping, massages, and like again, you would think that Western societies actually created all this stuff, and like they had. But no. We've been here for a long time actually, and I think that's just very important to discuss and to talk about. And this is, part of really small research that we've done. Actually, there's a great series on YouTube by Yaqeen Institute called Holistic Healing by Dr. Wania. Dr. Wania is a professor of psychiatry at Stanford, and she's also a professor of Islamic law and theology. She does a lot of great work on psychology and Islam. And, I know a lot of Muslims on campus also take psychology. I highly, highly recommend, seeing some of her paper, her work. And I think, next time you have a debate with, the older generations about, you should just go pray more, we could, discuss all these.
Be like, bring up your evidence.
Actually,
Islam says this about mental health. So on top, and like adding on to that, I feel like in the Quran, for every emotion that you feel, like whether it's happiness, sadness, anger, there's always some sort of instruction on like how you should, what's the word I'm looking for? How to react with like how you're feeling. Like, for example, if you're angry, stay silent. You don't want to say something that might offend someone and put both of you in like a position that might hurt you and that person.
I think so. This is a great point that you mentioned, and I want to bring it back to the idea of masculinity and how like viewing like expressing your emotions as a less masculine feature. Just because I've heard a lot of people, they think like if you're screaming or if you're angry, that means you're more of a man, quote unquote. Although the Prophet ﷺ instructed us, if you're angry, you actually need to sit down, and if you are sitting down, lay down, because you need to control your anger. The strong people are the people who are able to control their emotion rather than just lash out on everyone around them. And that's what really defines a strong person who's able to handle their emotions. And
because it doesn't take much effort to like go out, say whatever you want. It takes more effort when you're feeling all those emotions to hold that in and know that like justice will come.
Absolutely. And like going back to how people might say, because you're a man you shouldn't cry, or because that's not masculine.
Boys don't cry, kind of notation.
It's really against everything we learn, because throughout the Prophet's life, ﷺ, he went through very hard events. Absolutely. Anyone who knows the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, how much grief and pain he went through.
There was a whole year dedicated called the year of sadness, the year of sorrow.
And when the Prophet ﷺ, like a good example, when he buried his son Ibrahim, how he was crying over his son.
Could you imagine multiple examples in the Prophet's life. Could you imagine having lost your father like literally before you were born, having lost your mother at the age of 6, having lost your uncle at the age of 8, having had to bury your own son.
And I think people sometimes associate, they're like, again, you don't have good faith if you're having mental challenges, which is not true, because Allah, He tests His beloved servants.
Whom He loves,
and we need to remember that. So it's not your lack of faith the way you're feeling. Actually, we talk about it later, how this is actually called cognitive reframing, and that's what we call it now. Islam was doing it a long time ago. And I think once we start like looking at these things and we maybe translate them into the more scientific terms that people like to use, you'd realize how much there is power in them actually. But yeah, the boys don't cry thing, it's just bad for everyone in the community. For the men who have to always suppress their feelings, which is not, it shouldn't be that way, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us with our brains and our emotions to let out all these.
He did not deny you any of these like beautiful emotions.
Exactly. And we cry for a reason. We cry so to let out the grief that we have inside of. So blocking out that channel completely will make men miserable, and
it will make you go numb, and it will in a way it will harden your heart. And a hardened heart is never something you want for yourself.
Absolutely. And it removes the humanity of a human. A human is not supposed to be a rock. We're human.
We're not robots. We have emotions.
Exactly. So I think for also women and other people in the community who, if they're to make sure that they create safe spaces. Like, for example, if you have a brother, make sure you create a safe space for him to talk to you, to discuss things with you if they can, just to make sure that we're changing something in the community, because we all know how the pain, we see it, but it's how you as an individual are able to help in your community. So check up on your friends.
Check up on your friends, check up on your brothers, your siblings, fathers, I would say your children, but wait.
Just make sure you ask, how are you doing? Is everything good? I think that would help a lot. And if they cry or if they do show emotions, do not be like, oh, you're a man, don't cry, man up, and stuff like that.
And I think another connotation is that when someone asks, how are you doing, it's like your automatic brain reflex response is going to say oh, I'm fine, I'm well, I'm good, how are you? But when someone asks how you're doing, when I ask someone how you're doing, I genuinely want to know how you're doing.
I agree. And if you don't get to talk to your friends about how you're feeling, where else do you get to talk about that?
I think a lot of people may have that idea that they don't want to be seen as weak in front of others. But
I understand that. But again, Allah created us as a community. We need to help each other. That's why again it's a social responsibility for Muslims to visit the people who are ill or people who are struggling, because that's how we create a community. We are here on this earth to serve others, and Allah makes us serve each other. That's the beauty, because Allah can give us everything we want, but Allah wants us to give it to each other. He wants us to help each other so we can all end up in Jannah, inshallah.
But I feel even if you are still uncomfortable with talking to others, you can always talk to Allah. Allah will hear you no matter where you are, honestly.
Absolutely. And again, I feel because the initial reaction for mental health or crises or whatever, they would be go pray. A lot of people actually get pushed away from prayer, and that's not what we're trying to say here. Prayer helps a lot, but also if you need professional help, that you absolutely need that. As I was discussing, how Islam has also given us these certain things that allow us to deal with our emotions, our mental health. An example, for example, is dhikr. I know dhikr is, you'd be oh, just go do dhikr, but it's actually again, it does a lot of cognitive reframing, which I wanted to discuss a bit. You thinking a lot of, when you are going through these emotions, your brain can fill up with a lot of negative thoughts. So if you know facts Allah tests that people who He loves, Allah is here for you, Allah, that way you can calm down all these negative emotions.
And I feel doing dhikr, it helps remind you of those important things. The more tests you go through in this world, and the better you handle it, the more you'll be rewarded for it in the hereafter.
Exactly. And also there's a lot of dua that actually where you ask Allah refuge from worry and sorrow, and having that, because we believe that if you ask God for something, He will give it to you. So
if not that, He'll give you something
better. Exactly. So using that to your advantage all the time. And also, this is a really nice point, that Muslims were instructed to seek out cure for all illnesses, and that Allah has placed He has placed a cure for every illness. So we need to
old age.
Except old age, exactly. So that means that we are, as Muslims instructed to look for cures for mental health problems and stuff like that. So we're not supposed to be like, oh, just go pray and stuff like that. We're actually instructed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make it easier for people around us.
Yeah. So relating back to that point about where you said, just go pray pushes people away.
Yeah.
I feel like a big factor about that is because when you're young, like a lot of people, they're just taught, you should pray your 5 daily prayers.
Yes.
Read your azkar, do this, do that, read Quran. But nobody's really taught, like, why you should do it, the effect it has on you.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I feel like once you find that effect for yourself, it plays a huge role on, like, not only your, like, mental health, but, like, everything around you.
Yeah.
You start to think about things differently, you start to act differently, and, like, it just reshapes your whole, life.
Yeah, absolutely. And for example, like I found, when I'm maybe anxious and let's say I go read Quran, I would feel better. But then like later on, I realized that this is actually because tajweed, helps you regulate your breath. And when you are anxious, if you need to do breathing exercises, let's say, and regulate your breath. So there are so many stuff that as you try them, when you actually try them out, you realize how that might affect you. And this is honestly something I'm like very general about Muslims. If sometimes other Muslims would push you towards something, make you hate it, and just don't give them the power to. I think we kind of talk about that a little bit in our hijab episode, where like if someone is trying to force you or someone's trying to like, push you to do something and that's like pushing you away from Islam, don't let them have that, it's just really frustrating because it's such a beautiful thing for someone to take away from you just because they want to, control whatever.
Yeah, they want to control it for you.
Exactly. So being pushed away from your 5 daily prayers or from reading Quran, although you would have found so much actual, help and like tama'nina, which is like, I forgot what tama'nina is. But like, you would find so much refuge in that, and generally like don't let people push you away from that because they're taking away that from you, and that's not fair to yourself.
Yeah, don't let people like around you deny you of those like beautiful rights you have been given as a Muslim.
Yeah, and don't let them shape that for you. So if you did, or if you did have a bad experience with that, try to look past that and don't allow them to control you and prevent you from having that. You also need to remember that Allah knows what's going on in your life, and sometimes you're pushing yourself just to get out of bed, and Allah knows all of that. Allah sees you. Allah sees how much you're struggling to take care of yourself, and that's another thing. Allah, like you have a right upon yourself. That's something you always have to remember, and Allah gave you like. You need to take care of yourself, and sometimes that's very hard for a lot of people. So sometimes just getting out of bed, having breakfast can be the hardest thing someone could do, but you are taking a lot of hasanat for that because you are taking care of yourself. That Allah gave you that for yourself.
Yeah, and another thing is, I feel like I might have mentioned this in a previous episode, but there is no like bit of pain that a believer feels.
Yeah.
Like even like when you're putting on your hijab and you like prick your finger or whatever on your pin.
Yeah.
There's no bit of pain that a believer feels that he won't be rewarded for it in the hereafter.
Yes. And so this is like another way of thinking about it, because when we wrote this episode, me and Wania, we were thinking about also like these mindsets that you could switch that could really help you go through life. And one of my favorite books ever is called Reclaim Your Heart. I think I've told everyone who knows me knows about this book. It's by Yasmin Mujahid, and she discusses a lot of, about how to stay focused in life and how to deal with grief, sadness, and stuff like that. And one of the most important points she's mentioned, it's the nature of this life. I feel like sometimes we forget that this life was not meant to be perfect. Us as humans, our original home is Jannah, heaven, and heaven is perfect. That's why we're expecting everything to be perfect. That's why, and actually this seeking for perfection is what gets us to Jannah, because as you go through life, your fitra, you're like, I'm seeking for something that's perfect, and then you realize that this life is not perfect, and then you end up knowing more about Jannah. And so we need to remember that as much as we want life to be perfect, it's not, and it is a test at the end of the day.
I feel like that thing where you said seeking for perfection, it's important to remember that like your perfection end goal is not in this world. It's in the hereafter. If you look for your end goal in this world, like you're basically chasing this world, where this world was meant for as a punishment for Adam alayhi salam.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be happy in this world, but that means you shouldn't lose sight of that this world is short and you just need to do your best here, and then the eternal life is after. And as Muslims, we need to keep reminding yourself of that. So even if you and your friends, discuss that, it's always, I think it's a nice conversation to remind yourself, especially like after midterms where you think the world isn't gonna end after you get your chemistry mark. It's good to remind yourself that this is just a means to our original home, which is Jannah.
Another thing you can do is like when Allah is putting you through a trial, don't think of it as like, why do I have to like go through this or whatever,
Yeah.
Like you can think of it as more like, I know like we mentioned the point several times where of course you're rewarded for like, what's it called, the trials you go through and how you deal with them. But you can also think of it about it as like, why is Allah trying to teach me through this?
Yes, absolutely.
Because every lesson you learn, like, it helps to shape who you become as a person.
Yes, and my personal favorite way to think, when things get hard is لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, which just means that Allah does not burden a soul
beyond what it can bear.
Yeah, and that just means that if this is, you're going through something, you think you can't do it, but Allah only gave it to you, only gave you this strength.
You think you can't do it, but Allah knows you can do it.
Exactly, Allah sees that in you, and that means like He sees something in you that you don't see in yourself, so you're gonna keep pushing until you get out of that. And although the journey with Allah is on your own, you don't have to be lonely while you're going through it.
Yeah, I feel like the journey towards like, finding your religion and stuff, once you like actually get on that path, you're gonna like start filtering out like a lot of things, whether it be like, friends that aren't good for you, whether it be habits that aren't good for you, whether it be like, like genuinely being in places that are not good for you. You're gonna start filtering those things out, and you're gonna like feel that you're kind of lonely in that area. But you have to remember that like you're not alone. You're really not.
And sometimes Allah takes something from you and replaces it with something better, and you need to keep looking at the long run.
Yeah,
I think that's what we, as Muslims, that's how we're programmed to look at the long run. How this small thing right now gonna affect me later on, and it brings us to faith. Having faith, I truly believe that faith makes a human so strong and like strong as beings.
Yeah.
Because if you have faith, you truly become invincible. And you hear about all these amazing stories of people who stood against their oppressors, or people who are so inspiring. They always were motivated and they always got what they want. And you think, you're like, wow, these people, what do they have that I don't have?
And you realize it's faith.
It's the 100% faith.
Yeah.
That's the most magical part, when you're crying in your room alone and no one hears you but Allah. And for you see no way of it getting better. You don't see it getting better, but you have faith that Allah will make it better for you. And when it does get better, you're gonna look back at that. You're
gonna laugh.
Yeah.
You're gonna laugh, honestly.
Yeah, and you thought like this is the end of the world, and it's just important to think about that. It's important to have support, but at the end of the day, sometimes when you're dealing with like very specific stuff, you might feel alone, but always remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is there.
I feel like another important point to talk about is having sabr, first of all, and having tawakkul.
Yeah.
Like patience and what's the word for tawakkul?
Like putting faith in Allah,
patience
basically.
and faith.
Yeah,
they go hand in hand, especially with mental health.
Yeah, I think, of course, like sabr is a huge thing. What we talk about, we discuss how you need to, that this is a test, and you need to keep going through life because it is a test at the end of the day. But also tawakkul. So tawakkul basically means that Allah will help me through it, but you also need to do your part, which literally brings us to the point of, okay, Allah will help you. You do your part. You pray. You do all that. But at the end of the day, you need to take steps to become better. That could be through talking to your family. That could be through talking to a counselor or to a therapist, getting medication. Because you can't just like ask Allah, for help.
Like,
you're not helping
God
yourself.
help me, and then you just lie
down and cry in your bed. Yeah, we can get help in so many ways, and I think that's what we wanted to highlight most in this episode. Mental health is real, and it's been real. And in Islam, we had institutions and so many ways where we were able to deal with it, that be through medicine or holistic treatment or other sorts of therapy like auditory therapy and stuff like that. So
So, like, as humans, mental health is something that has always been there. It will always be there. And, like, you know, I mean, it is there. It has always been there. It's here now, and it will
always be
here.
there.
Yeah.
If you choose to ignore it, that does not mean it doesn't
that's
exist.
a new problem.
That does not mean it doesn't exist. And just all in all, you do your best, but you need to, you do tawakkul on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but you also need to be doing your part. So take this as your sign. If you've been feeling down lately, if you've been feeling like you've had, pretty dark thoughts, or you've been feeling that for a long time.
Reach out to those around you, those who love you, your friends, your family.
Absolutely.
If not anyone, reach out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can always talk to him about your day. I feel like when you talk to Allah about your day, like, you just sit there, like, obviously he knows everything that's going on.
Yeah.
But when you sit there and you, like, tell him, like, hey God, this is what happened today. So, like, it's like it gives you that sense of comfort.
I know a lot of my friends, we'd sit down and, like, tell a lot about all the things that happened in the day, as if, like,
like you didn't even talk about
telling them. Yeah, it's just a way for you to let things out. But also, I wanna direct people towards like resources that are here on Western campus. So you can go to counselors through the wellness center, and I think that helps a lot. I know a lot of my friends and, like, people I know have really benefited from that. There's also peer support, where you could just sit down and talk to someone, and that also could be really helpful, because sometimes you just need to talk to someone and to feel heard. So that this is just your sign. It's you don't have to live miserably, and it's not because your faith prevents you from that, because as we've shown multiple examples, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
your faith encourages us.
Yeah, you need to be able to deal with your emotions, to become a better person, and to do service to this.
How are you going to do service for those around you as a Muslim if you can't, like, handle the turmoil facing inside yourself?
Yes, and how are you not serving yourself at the end of the day? Again, there's a lot of awesome resources that we've mentioned here. Dr. Rania and a lot of her research paper, Yaqeen Institute, they have a great series about holistic treatment of mental health. I think that's what it's called. And of course, this amazing book called Reclaim Your Hide. I do recommend everyone read it, and let's have a discussion about this. I feel like if I make a book club, that would be definitely the first book that I recommend. And then that's it for today. Take care, guys.
Episode. Take care.
UmmahSpeaks out.
تبالي فالمعالي بالتحدي لا سواه كن سعيدا